everyone, welcome back to the Genesis study. In the last episode we talked about Jacob's blindness and how Leah symbolized the negative things that were handed down from Jacob. Handed down to Jacob from Isaac. But in this episode we're going to talk about why God chose Rebecca over Leah. We're going to talk about what they went through. So this chapter starts off in a really interesting way, because once again what's happening now is another thing that happened to Abraham that Jacob's being put through. In the first verse of chapter 30 it says, when Rachel saw that she bare Jacob no children, Rachel envied her sister, and she said unto Jacob, give me child, or else I die. With a deep desperation comes a form of stupidity. I'm sure that we've all had moments in our life where we've done dumb things out of desperation, such as letting your husband make love to your maid because you wanted a child, hooking up with that person you shouldn't have because you were horny, or giving away your birthright because you were hungry. Sarah did the first and Esau did the latter, which is strange because the way Sarah acted is the same way Rachel is acting. Out of desperation did Sarah give Abraham her maid, and we all know how that ended. So just like Sarah, Rachel gives Jacob her handmaid to wife, and by the handmaid Rachel is given a son. By the way, did I say Rebecca at the start? My bad, I meant to say Rachel, sorry about that. I don't want to jump the gun though, because Jacob says something that's worth taking note here, and it's that, am I in God's stead? Who hath withheld from me the fruit of thy womb? He said this out of anger towards Rachel. Could that be because Rachel was complaining and whining, which caused Jacob's anger to be kindled against her? Another person who he said shared the same mantle as Jacob is Moses. This is something Moses would have absolutely said. Jacob is saying to Rachel, what do you want me to do about it? It's not my fault God did this, so instead of complaining to me, go and complain to God about it. Yet the sad thing is that he does play a part in this. It is kind of his fault. The whole reason God had to close her womb was due to his hatred for Leah. A valuable lesson to take away from this would be that beauty has its place, but it's fleeting. One day you'll get old, wrinkly, your hair will go grey, you'll become useless and die. You can't marry someone just because they look attractive. Because if you're going to base your main reason for marrying someone based on how they look alone, then things aren't going to end well for you. This is what God wanted Jacob to understand. Leah may have not been the prettiest. She may have not ticked all his boxes, but in the end, she was the one who showed up. Which is what this is all about. And that extends to other aspects of life, and those things such as attractiveness, finances, the this and the that, they have their valid place. But in the end, when your money burns, you crash your fancy car, lose your nice house, when your looks and faculties betray you, what will you have left? The answer is Jesus. When all else fades, he'll still be there. Which is why when you get married, the covenant isn't based on what you have, but rather an external projection of your internal relationship with Christ. Just like Abraham and Haggai, Jacob takes Bilhah to wife, and according to Hebrew etymology, the meaning behind Bilhah's name is calamity, which would make sense going off what Rachel just said, and it's not the last time we're going to see her name come up. So it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out down the line. Also, another thing I'm interested to see play out is how this affects the head of the tribes. We've seen it play out how people's mothers can affect the direction of their lives, and we all know Bilhah is the mother of Dan and Naphtali. So it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out in their lives. The meaning of the name Dan is God judges, but I'm more interested in the meaning behind Naphtali's name. Genesis 30 verse 8. And Rachel said, With great wrestlings have I wrestled with my sister, and I have prevailed. And she called his name Naphtali. I refuse to believe the language being used here is coincidental. There's no way it's given to us with that specific phrasing. That's not done for no reason. We know that when Esau and Jacob were in the womb, they wrestled, they struggled. Jacob was holding on to the blessing the same way he was going to hold on to Christ for that blessing. So with that said, Rachel struggled with her sister for a blessing. She held on with the intent of being blessed, which means having favor, receiving something that would benefit her, but it came with a price. Change is painful. Something must have happened for God to give her favor. And as of right now, my best bet is that the relationship Jacob had with Rachel is being strengthened. They're going through some hardships right now because of that, they're being strengthened. But yet, the more we read on through the text, I can't help but get the feeling as if Rachel and Leah are in competition for each other, which make a lot of sense. Leah and Rachel are contending with each other the exact same way Esau and Jacob contended with each other. Jacob seems to symbolize Isaac in this case, while Rachel symbolizes Jacob and Leah symbolizes Esau. But how did I get to that conclusion? Well, in the last chapter, we spoke about Leah being blind and how it was to show Jacob that in marriage you get what you are, not what you want, as well as being a form of judgment. Leah was like his father. She was the physical embodiment of the negative things Isaac had passed down to Jacob. I also can't help but think Leah is acting out of jealousy here, which could be the reason why she's been left bearing. Leah's going tit for tat here with Rachel out of jealousy. And the more we read on through the text, the more clear that becomes. Genesis 30 verse 11 to 13. And Leah said, a troop cometh, and she called his name Gad. And Leah's maid bare Jacob a son. And Leah said, happy am I, for the daughters will call me blessed. And she called his name Asher. Let's break this down. Tea break first. Leah's response here further indicates the jealousy she's been feeling deep down. Happy am I, for the daughters will call me blessed. Seems to be a passive-aggressive jab at Rachel. And with that said, let's look at the etymology of Gad and Asher's name. Gad's name means fortune, as it comes from the Hebrew word gadad, which means to cut. Funny enough, that's what covenant means, right? But in relation to exposing, which gives the name a double meaning. Yes, it's a great name, as it means fortune, but the origin is rather painful. It depicts an action of cutting and exposing. It's a blessing, but at what cost? Which confirms what we're saying about Leah is true. She's jealous, deep down, and that's being exposed. Gad seems to act as the thing that pulls back the veil. A son is a wonderful thing, yet it just goes to show her heart posture. The meaning of Asher's name continues to add to this theme of passive-aggressive jealousy. Asher means happy, within the context of uprightness, but also pain, as well as Asher, which means right on, which could mean she's happy because the Lord is making a way for her. Yet I myself can't ignore the jealousy and frustration that's been hinted at with her words. So let's just rip the veil off right away. The whole encounter Rachel and Leah have over the mandrakes is the same dispute Jacob and Esau have over the pottage. It turns out the mandrakes are good at increasing fertility rates. Now, the Bible never says this outright about the context of what's going on here. All it tells us is that Reuben went to gather mandrakes for his mother. It doesn't tell us why he was doing this. Meaning, if Rachel asked him to go and gather them for her, and if mandrakes are meant to increase fertility, then we can just deduce that she sent Reuben out to get them for her so that she can receive another blessing. But yet, so does Rachel. They really are contending for this blessing. Remember that Rachel has yet to have her womb open, so when she goes to Leah asking for the mandrakes, Leah's response is one filled with frustration, but it tells us a lot about what's really happening here. Genesis 30 verse 15. And she said unto her, Is it a small matter that thou hast taken my husband, and wouldest thou take away my son's mandrakes also? And Rachel said, Therefore he shall lie with thee tonight for thy son's mandrakes. In this scenario, Leah represents Esau, Rachel represents Jacob, and Jacob represents Isaac. Leah and Rachel, because right now Leah has the blessing, but it doesn't belong to her, because Rachel is the favored one in Jacob's eyes. In this scenario, Leah represents Esau, Rachel represents Jacob, and Jacob represents Isaac. Leah and Rachel, because right now Leah has the blessing, but it does not belong to her, because Rachel is the favored one in Jacob's eyes. The situation seems to be like what happened with the pottage, but in reverse. It's as if, in terms of the covenant, Jacob has taken his father's place. It's his turn to step up now, which could be why God is favoring Rachel. Well, one reason at least. Ever since Jacob laid eyes on Rachel, he wanted her. He worked for her. He sowed for her. And it cost him a lot, which, as we now know, he's also suffering the consequences of his actions regarding what he did to Esau. And with all that said, Leah is like Esau. She has the birthright, but it doesn't belong to her. It belongs to Rachel. Rachel wants it, but Leah's not giving over, which paints a rather vivid image of faith, I suppose, or maybe just stubbornness. That I'm not too sure on, but one thing is for certain, and it's that Leah is angry. She says to her sister, Do you not care that you've taken my husband, and now you're going to go and take my blessing too? She's feeling rather threatened at this point. In the last chapter, we spoke about Leah being blind, which is why she was married first. It was to teach Jacob that you get who you are when it comes to marriage. She was like his father in a sense because that blindness has been passed down to Jacob. And in the end, Rachel finally has Joseph, which is the one Jacob favored, which represents him handing down to Joseph the nepotism Jacob learned from Isaac. And speaking of Rachel, her response was to put Leah to the test. And in all honesty, I was having some struggle trying to figure out what this meant, trying to figure out the deeper meaning of what's going on here. So I looked towards the etymology of Issachar's name, which seems to shed some light on the situation. According to the Hebrew, his name means man of hire. There is recompense, which means compensation. With that said, it tells us that Leah has been compensated. She has had something returned to her, which goes back to what happened as to the reason Leah laid with Jacob for the mandrakes. Genesis 30 verse 16. And Jacob came out of the field in the evening, and Leah went out to meet him and said, Thou must come in unto me, for surely I have hired thee with my son's mandrakes. For starters, I find it quite funny how this verse starts off, because it just goes to show how much Jacob has changed. And Jacob came out of the field in the evening. The young Jacob would have been called dead in the field. But ever since then, he really has been stepping into the person God has called him to be. Leah then says to him that she's hired him with her sons and mandrakes, which is such a weird way to word this. I've given you my son's mandrakes as a wage, now you must do this for me. It's kind of like prostitution. Ridiculous. Grow up, Brendan. This is a rather weird way of putting it, to say the least, but what we do know is that God hearkens unto her for it. And I'm a little bit embarrassed to admit this, but I literally, as I was writing this, I only just noticed that hearken means to hear, because the first 4 letters were spelled out here. Anywho, I should have got that a long flipping time ago. But anywho, the question to ask here is, why did God hearken unto her? The reason she gives is due to the fact that she gave Jacob her maid. We have to remember that they're both contending for a blessing here, for the main reason being due to the covenant of Abraham, which is why they're like Jacob and Esau. By Leah saying what she said, she's saying to Jacob, I've done this out of faith. I picked these mandrakes because I want to have this blessing with you. Her faith has caused her to do a good work as well as sacrificing something dear to her, which, as we know, was her maid Zilpah, which means a drop. This has caused some fireworks to go off in my brain, because it reminds me of what Jesus said about faith. Faith as small as a mustard seed can move mountains. All that woman needed was to touch the hem of his garment. So it appears Leah giving her maid to Jacob was an act of faith. But another thing that jumps out to me about this is what Rachel said regarding when she gave her maid to Jacob. She said, "She shall bear upon my knees." And when I read that, instantly I was reminded of how Abraham made his servant swear on his loins. We said Abraham made him swear upon creation itself. Rachel said her maid will bear upon my knees, meaning she will have a child for her. The imagery of knees here seems to be equivalent of swearing upon the loins. There's an image of creation and faith being painted here, because the reason Rachel and Leah are contending is for that blessing because of the covenant Jacob is a part of. But this can seem rather selfish, because they're not doing it for selfish gain. Is it genuine, or is it out of desperation? There is a genuine love here for Jacob, but the scary and even sad thing is that love seems to be coming more from Leah than Rachel. But this opens up the door for a whole different conversation, and that begs the question, does Leah love Jacob genuinely or out of desperation? Again, we have to go back to the meaning of their names. Now, I know I've been focusing on that a lot, but I've been doing it for a great reason. If you cast your mind back to the start of the study, we talked about the vital meaning of one's name. And so far, we've overlooked one key aspect of this entire situation, and that is the meaning behind Leah and Rachel's names. According to Hebrew etymology, the meaning behind Leah's name is derived from the Hebrew word, I'm going to butcher this, la. I'm probably, yeah. La. That's probably it, I don't know. Which means to be weary or grieved, alongside wild cow. Now, if we break that down, the meaning behind it is astoundingly profound and reveals to us the true nature of Leah's character and why she couldn't get the blessing. I don't know about you, but whenever I think of a cow in biblical terms, my mind instantly jumps to the golden calf. It's actually become a split reaction for me at this point, in all honesty. But we won't go into too much depth for the time being. So all I'll say about the golden calf is it symbolizes worshipping suffering. And as we have discussed throughout this study, human beings are designed for worship, which is why when God gave the reason for freeing his people, it was so they could sacrifice to him, to worship him, because God knows that human beings are designed to worship. It doesn't matter who you are, what you've done, or what you believe. At the end of the day, every human being bows their knee to something. Now, if we take that and hold it up against the other meaning of our name, which is weary and grieved, then we can establish something rather heartbreaking about Leah's character. Thus far, Leah's character has mostly been weary and grieved, which leads us to ask, what is she bowing down to? It seems to be her motives, It seems to be her motives to what she does are rooted in love, and that again leads to the brutal million-pound question. Does Leah actually love Jacob? Or is she clinging on to the first person that looks twice at her out of fear? It's a definition of love rooted in her physical circumstances. I'm going to tell you a quick story, because we like story time. It's a story I've told many times, but I've told it before, at least, but it applies here. Now, I'm not happy to admit it, but I used to be like Leah. My perception of myself was that I had been through too much, and that determined my value. My identity was in suffering and not in God. And because of that, it cost me heavily. Just like Leah, I thought I was defined by poor sight. Therefore, who would love me? Who would care for me? Who would ever want to be with me? And eventually my time came around. I got the one thing I never thought I'd ever get, and it drove me insane because I held on to it. I kept my grip even if the flesh of my hands was scalding off, because if I let this thing I so desperately wanted go, then if I lost it, then it would only prove the voices and the lies I didn't want to believe, yet did believe either way, true. And I could not afford to come face to face with that. The biggest tragedy is that over time, golden calves will reveal themselves. And when they do, they crumble, but you crumble with them because that is what your life is built on. The false truth you've been brainwashed to accept. I finally got what I never thought I'd ever get, so I wanted to protect it. But at the same time, because I never saw myself as worthy of having that in the first place, I would repel, and repel, until eventually I lost it and had to come face to face with the broken fragments of golden calf that had shattered through my skin. To conclude, I don't think Leah loved Jacob. Leah had spent her entire life alone when it came to relationships. Well, that's what it's hinted at, right? When she looked in the mirror, all she saw was her poor eyesight. Does that remind you of anyone? The exact same thing we're saying about Leah is word for word what we said about Esau. Rachel's name, on the other hand, is the complete opposite to Leah's. Rachel's name comes from the word Rahel, which means iwi. For those who don't know, that's a type of sheep. Now, instantly, your mind should be putting the pieces together with this one. If we look back on ourselves so far, you'll recall that sheep have always shown up at a particular interesting time, and that has been when someone has found their wife by a well. It happened with Rebecca, and it even happened with Jacob. He found Rachel at the well, tending to her flock. This tells us something important about Rachel. Rachel follows the same pattern all the favored women before her took part in. Jacob has paid attention to his parents. In this case, and it's one of the good things that was handed down, he saw the relationship of his parents and has seen that this is the way things should be. We've been talking so much about how our parents shape our perception of love in such a negative way that I completely forgot that it also works the other way around. In this instance, Rebecca has handed down a good report of love to her son. Remember that Jacob spent a lot of time with his mother growing up. So it's no coincidence that the woman he decided to marry is incredibly similar to his mother. Because Rebecca did a good job at showing him this is the type of woman you need to look for. If Rachel's name means Iwi, then what does this tell us about Rachel? It tells us that Rachel is a follower. She's a good, feminine, and godly woman. We've seen some of her flaws throughout this chapter that are similar to Rebecca's flaws, such as the correlation between the mandrakes and the venison, for example. Leah is a form of judgment, and in a sense, and yes, God can give her favor because her identity is rooted heavily in circumstances and a hidden form of self-hatred. She's just like Esau. God can't bless her more than he already has. With that said, it should spark up in you a desire for self-reflection because God is so generous in his ways. He's a loving and giving God. He gives more than you ask of him when he shouldn't have to, but that's the type of God we serve. And when it comes down, and if it comes to the point where God can't give you more than he already has, then maybe that says something about you rather than about him. Because why would God treat you differently in that sense? Meaning, why would God go against his word just for you? And on a similar note, we looked at Issachar's name, but we didn't look at Zebulun's. Genesis 30 verse 20. And Leah said, God hath endured me with a good dowry. Now will my husband dwell with me, because I have borne him 6 sons. And she called his name Zebulun. Continuing on with the theme of identity and how that has the potential for you to block your own blessings, the name Zebulun comes from the Hebrew word Zabal, which means exaltation and honor. The name Zebulun means glorious dwelling place. But since the behavior of Leah is bringing us down the path of blessing blocking, this pacing, when I was writing this, I was pacing the flaws. unable to shake this question. Who is Leah trying to fool? Jacob? God? I'm more in favor of the latter. Herself. I ask this because after studying her character, we know now that deep down she doesn't want another child. That's not her end goal here. I don't even think she wants the blessing at this point. It seems like Rachel and Leah are wrestling for two different things. Rachel wants the blessing, whereas Leah just wants Jacob. She just wants to feel worthy of love, but she's looking for it in external places and it's not helping. Solomon said in Proverbs and Ecclesiastes that the eyes are never satisfied, and within this context, in regards to human relations and human behavior, it goes deeper than sin, but it depends on how you look at sin within the context, because sin could mean bondage and iniquity, and that would look like this. Maybe if I took one more drink, one more line, one more injection, hooked up with one more guy or girl, depending on what gender is, then I will be able to find value, and then there's the sin, as in shutting God out. We're going right back to Cain with this one. Leah only wants one thing here, and as we said, it's Jacob. It's to know she's loved, but she's looking for it. She's looking externally instead of internally. I've seen firsthand just how destructive that can be for a human being. And not just people, but mostly Christians. I've seen people of God struggle heavily with these things such as depression, and they went to everyone but God. They'd say things such as, "No one even cares about me. If I killed myself tonight, who would care? You're all fake friends because you saw me suffering and you did nothing." And to that I say, were you given wisdom? You were given wisdom. Did you implement it? You were invited to Bible studies. Did you attend? Did you partake in fellowships, or did you cut yourself off? Have you even prayed about it? I've seen God allow people to continue on this path, to teach them that they're putting their faith in the wrong places. And he'll do this by allowing the people you're putting your faith into to let you down, because people are flawed. People let you down no matter how close you are. People who are married could tell you there is no one who's let them down more than their spouse. And this is not to say screw humanity, I'm not going to care about you and just focus on God, because that's ridiculous. People who walk down this destructive path end up like Cain. But even Cain realized that humans are not meant to be isolated creatures. God eventually judged Cain by exiling him and his family. God marked him so that no other human being would give him the time of day for as long as he lived, and his response to God was that the judgment was too much. Even Cain, the first man to ever have been born, the first murderer, knew that it was not good for man to be alone. When men go down that route, they end up like Cain. Remember how we spoke about that that's eventually what happens to Esau? God has given Leah blessing after blessing after blessing after blessing. And every single time she received this blessing, the end goal in mind was so that Jacob would love her. No matter what God gives her, it's never enough for her. She is never satisfied internally because her identity isn't in God. It's in circumstances. I'm of the personal opinion that yes, Jacob marrying Leah was a form of judgment, but I suppose God also allowed this to happen so they could see their flaws. If we go back to Jacob stealing the blessing, we talked about how humans not being able to see what they cannot see. Furthermore, if we take what we said about marriage into account, God allowed this to happen so that Jacob and Leah could have a mirror held up to them. It's the same thing with Esau. God could not give him the blessing because of the lack of faith. And the same thing is happening now with Leah. God cannot entrust Leah with the blessing because not only of lack of faith, but because she's a bastard child. When I think of Leah and Esau, Hebrews 12 instantly comes to mind. They seek repentance, love, compassion, peace, all the things they cry out for, but yet they never find it, and go about their life in mourning, all because they don't know God as their Heavenly Father. God is always there. But the sad part is that they leave him standing there. One of my biggest pet peeves that almost angers me every time I hear it is when I hear people say, God hasn't done anything for me. God hasn't helped me. God doesn't care. It really, really pees me off. Because if only you'd stop dumping all your issues on him and complaining to him and then walking away when you don't hear from him, when you haven't given him the chance to speak in the first place. Hebrews 12 is such a wonderful chapter regarding God as a parent. He doesn't want bastard children. He wants sons and daughters. To be unbiased, it's only fair to say that on the other hand, it's understandable because it's in our fallen nature to run away from the one person who can help us get out of shame, guilt, and other feelings and so on. We let God down how many times? No wonder we run away. But the beautiful thing about that is if that's the case, then even the flesh understands that God is holy. Holy and holy. Because if not, then why would the flesh be ashamed? Which is why Hebrews 12 goes into detail about chastising and conviction. Not from a place of hatred and condemnation, but out of love. And then this is why Rachel receives the blessing. And before we actually get there, there's one more thing to go over about Leah. And it's something I think a lot of people forget. And it's that Leah has a daughter. Genesis 30 verse 21. And afterwards she bare a daughter and called her name Dinah. As some of you may know, the life Dinah lived was a rather tragic one. Her name carries a heavy meaning. It means judgment, which could be taken in a lot of different ways. We won't focus on future events as of where we are right now in Genesis, so we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. But as of right now, this form of judgment could be an indication that God has judged Rachel and Leah. If what we've said about Leah this whole time is true, then it's no coincidence that Leah gives birth to her, and then immediately afterwards Rachel has her first child and is given the blessing. It could also be as a capping of creation, because we all know by now that 7 represents creation. Thus far, Leah has had 6 sons, but the 7th son turns out to be the real blessing, because again, the 7th day is the holy day, the set apart day, and instead of giving birth to another son, she gives birth to a daughter. God judged her, saw her heart, and knew that she could not receive the blessing, so instead gave it to Rachel. Genesis 30 verses 22 to 24. And God remembered Rachel, and God hearkened to her, and opened her womb, and she conceived, and bare a son, and said, God has taken away my reproach. And she called his name Joseph, and said, the Lord shall add to me another son. There is a specific word choice that's being used here. And God remembered Rachel. Whenever this specific phrase comes up in scripture so far, its meaning has always been in regards to covenants. The first example that came to mind was Noah. Another example would be Genesis 19 when God destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. God remembered Abraham. In hindsight, it was probably the reason God spared Lot and his family, because even though he was a hindrance to Abraham and his destiny, God knew that Abraham loved him and therefore spared Lot because he had a connection to the covenant. When we look at this through the lens of covenants, we know that God didn't remember her, as in he forgot her, but rather he had judged Leah and saw that Rachel had more faith. Therefore, God knew that she could be given the blessing. She said that God took away her reproach. That would mean to rebuke. Not only was she rebuked because God was humbling Jacob, but also because Rachel was jealous of her sister. But on a more positive note, now that Rachel has received the blessing, it is a testament to her faith. The meaning of the name Joseph means to increase or to add, because that's what a blessing is, and she's taking this by faith. She's waited a long time to get this breakthrough, but no matter how long it took, she continues to operate by faith. And even now, when she's got the blessing, she's still operating out of faith. God has seen this and rewarded her abundantly. Remember that faith is not about feelings. It's about showing up even when you don't see results. Moving on. Jacob attempts to depart from Laban. Once the sons are born, once the blessing has been received, Jacob asked Laban if he can take his family and go back to his homeland. Jacob served Laban 7 years for Leah and then 7 more years for Rachel, so that's 14 years. The events of the end of Genesis 29 to where we are right now is said to have taken 9 years, which means in total that's 23 years he served Laban, but Jacob doesn't. That's 23 years he served Laban, but Laban doesn't want Jacob to go because he's realized something interesting about Jacob. Genesis 30 verse 27 to 28. And Laban said unto him, I pray thee, if I have found favor in thine eyes, tarry. For I have learned by experience that the Lord hath blessed me for thy sake. And he said, appoint me thy wages, and I will give it. Laban has realized that as long as Jacob has been working for him, he's been blessed and he's seen an increase. Laban has been blessed for Jacob's sake. But why? Because Jacob is tied to the covenant with Abraham, and now Laban has been blessed because of that connection. Really and truly, he doesn't want Jacob to leave, so he offers him something rather funny. He says, whatever you want me to pay, I'll pay. Just say the number. Imagine one day if your boss turned around and said that to you. You're such an asset to this company. We really value you. The difference you've made to this company is so good. As a goodwill gesture, we'll increase your pay by whatever amount you like. That's called wishful thinking. Oh, man, I don't know about you, but I'd be beating the air. Because they can see my work ethic. What it means to be a Christian. There's something different about me and they can't pinpoint it. But, a rather huge but, Jacob's response to Laban was a wonderful and highly respectable one. If we stay on track for 1 second, if your boss came up to you and said that, would you take the deal? Would you sell out and continue to work a job that doesn't fulfill you for the sake of money? Jacob didn't. Genesis 30 verses 29 to 30. And he said unto him, Thou knowest how I have served thee, and how thy cattle was with me, for it was little which thou hadst before I came, and it is now increased unto a multitude, and the Lord hath blessed thee since my coming. And now when shall I provide for my own house also? This response just goes to show where his loyalty is. And it's with his family, because he refuses to sell out. He refuses to be that type of person who works so much they have no time to spend with their family. Laban keeps on pushing him to take the wage, to sell out, but Jacob holds his ground because he only wants one thing: his family. I don't think Jacob is worried much about the financial side of things because he's seen God move. And also, let's not forget, Laban has pulled this trick before with Leah. So Jacob isn't falling for it twice. He has faith that God will continue to bring the increase which is made evident in the next part of this chapter. Genesis 30 verse 31. And he said, "What shall I give thee?" And Jacob said, "Thou shalt not give me anything. If thou wilt do this thing for me, I will again feed and keep thy flock." Jacob proposes this to Laban. Verse 32. "And I will pass through the flock, all thy flock today, removing from thence all the speckled and spotted cattle, and all the brown cattle among the sheep, and the spotted and speckled among the goats, and of such shall be my hire." When I first read this, my mind jumped to Leviticus, because in that book it is repeated constantly that if and when you're going to make a sacrifice to the Lord, it has to be perfect. It can't be spotted or blemished. It can't have defects in that way, because you're making a sacrifice to the Lord. Therefore, you have to give up your best. Yet Jacob is saying here that he wants the animals that aren't good enough, the ones that nobody wants. And he lets Laban keep all the good, whole, and pure animals. But the question to ask is why? Laban here is being rather difficult by almost tempting Jacob. Laban asks, "Ask for whatever you want and it's yours," but Jacob's reply is, "I just want my family." This deal is rather unfair at face value, because the odds are stacked in Laban's favor. Jacob is still working for him, but now he's taken the burden of the spotted livestock off Laban's shoulders. It's a win-win for Laban. But by Jacob doing this, it appears he's learned his lesson. Jacob has picked up on a core characteristic of God, and that is God chooses those who the world doesn't look twice at. So Jacob continues to serve with faith that God is going to do what he does. Bless the ones the world rejects. Jacob even says that his righteousness will be his hire. And if any one of my flocks isn't like the ones they agreed on, then it would be so that Jacob had stolen from Laban. Again, Jacob is stacking the odds in Laban's favor, and I think the reason for that comes as we move through the text as well, as it being a sign of faith, not just to God, but to Laban. Jacob wants him to see that even though a line in the sand has been drawn, he is still a good and faithful servant. Laban, being Laban, agrees to this. The odds are in his favor. Of course he's going to say yes. Genesis 30 verse 35. "And he removed that day the he-goats that were ring-straked and spotted, and all the she-goats that were speckled and spotted, and every one that had some white in it, and all the brown among the sheep, and gave them into the hand of his sons." This is an act of holiness, setting apart the unloved and unwanted by the world, but loved and cherished by God. Jacob is the head of the tribe of Israel, and we knew, therefore, he is the shepherd of the unwanted flock. They've been marked by God, and if we take a deep look into the specific phrasing of this verse being used here, you may notice that again, going back to Moses, Jacob is going through something Moses will go through, and that is the events of the last plague. Jacob said he will pass through and separate the marked ones with the same way God said he would pass through, and he wouldn't kill the firstborn of those who had their doors and posts marked. Yet another thing that's so important to mention is that Jacob isn't doing this. It's Laban. Laban seems to represent Pharaoh in this situation, because it was only after God had killed the firstborns did Pharaoh let God's people go. So this is how Jacob became fruitful. This is such a fascinating array of events that takes place in this chapter, and even though it may seem short, the meaning behind this is incredible. For some reason, even though there's not enough evidence to back it up, verse 36 reminds me of when God finally managed to get Pharaoh to let his people go. Because Moses told him that he should let God's people go for 3 days to give sacrifices and worship, because God wanted his people to bow down to him instead of the corrupted wickedness man has become. It made me think of this because there is a 3-day separation taking place here. It's a holy separation. God is loosening Laban's grip off of Jacob, but what happens next is such an intriguing array of events. Genesis 30 verse 37 to 38. "And Jacob took him broad of the green poplar, and of the hazel and chestnut tree, and peeled white streaks in them, and made the white appear which was in the rods. And he set the rods which he had peeled before the flocks in the gutters, in the watering troughs, when the flocks came to drink, that they should conceive when they came to drink. At first, this may seem rather odd. If Jacob wanted his flock to conceive, then why did he go about it in such a strange way? And more importantly, why did it work? What Jacob did here was take the rods and cut away at the wood until streaks of white were visible. Now, when you think of it like that, the wood oddly resembles what the flocks look like. So now as the flock are bending down to drink water, the males are going to see the wood as a mate, and then, nature will take its course. I shall spare you the details. I couldn't help make the connection between what's happening here in Numbers 17, when Aaron's rod budded. The reason God did that is so he could set the record straight and stop the camp from murmuring against Aaron and Moses. And here God seems to be doing something similar by setting the record straight between Jacob and Laban. It's a symbol of faith as to what God can do when you walk by faith, because Jacob took the flock Laban didn't want. He took the unfavored, yet God still managed to bring an increase, which is another way the flock resembles the Israelites, because they multiplied in Egypt, even though Pharaoh did all that he could to stop it from happening, just like he's doing here. And lastly, is it a coincidence that they multiplied while they were drinking? The symbol of water shows up again, and since we're on the themes of Exodus, water symbolizes separation. It symbolizes holiness, because when God parted the sea, that was him separating his people from the Egyptians for good. That was him taking them from a horrible situation and making sure they came out clean on the other side. You can look at it as a form of baptism, because they are his set apart people and sanctified people, the ones who no one wanted anything to do with, well, in a positive way to say the least. The ring-straked and spotted flocks symbolize God's set-apart people. Genesis 30 verse 40. And Jacob did separate the lambs and set the face of the flocks toward the ring-straked and all the brown in the flock of Laban. And he put his own flocks by themselves and put them not unto Laban's cattle. Again, we have this imagery of separation, an imagery of holiness. Jacob here intentionally made it so all the ring-straked flock only saw each other, and gave the whole ones to Laban, because remember, Jacob did say that if any among his flock that wasn't ring-straked or spotted would be counted stolen from Laban. By doing this, he's showing the ring-straked and spotted flocks that they are the strong ones, they are the favored ones, and that Laban's flock isn't as blessed as they are, the same way God gave the Israelites favor when taking the promised land. Jacob only then put the rods out when the stronger cattle were going to conceive, because he knew they'd bring forth spotted and ring-straked flocks. And when the feebler flocks would conceive, he didn't put down the rods. Could this be because he knew they wouldn't bring forth spotted offspring? Potentially. It would make a lot of sense if that was the case, because when Pharaoh attempted to stop the multiplication of the Israelites, they only grew in number. And that is all we have for today. Thank you for watching. Thank you for sticking through this one. Thank you for your time and attention. I know uploads have been a little bit iffy, but I've been getting ahead. We recently hit 100,000 words, praise God. So back to somewhat of a regular upload schedule, and I look forward to it. We've got many things planned. God has been speaking to me a lot about this place, this channel, what to do with it, the content ideas, how to help its people. So I really look forward to that. We also have a Discord. I'll link that in the description if you're looking to get hold of a body. Just want to be a part of a body, come through, have Bible studies, have fellowship, just so you're not isolated. You can come through. Be more than happy to have you. Lastly, I recently started a business. I recently started a therapy session course. I made it, and I'm selling it alongside 12-week one-on-one sessions, because I was talking to God about it. I was like, what have you given me? What have you put inside me? I realized, oh shoot, you've given me this. So I'm just going to be using it, using the gifts God has given me to help my nation, help my people. And if that's something, well, not my people, his people, sorry. But if that's something you're interested in, I'll leave a link in the description below. But until next time, I look forward to it. And I'll see you then. Take care. God bless.